Good afternoon, everybody. I'd like to start with acknowledging the family members of Joe and Vicki that are here today. Of course, we have Dolores, Joe's mother, who I also refer to as Mom, which is okay because Joe also called my mother Mom, because that's how close our families were. She's also known as Nani to some of you. We also have Zachary, of course, Joe's son that we just heard from, and Zach's mother, Heidi, is here. And then, of course, Sylvia and Ed are here, and Alicia, his girlfriend. We also have his nephew, Joey, and his nephew, Alan. Alan, I remember when you were a little baby. And Alan's wife, Kelly, is here with us. And then his niece, Laura, and Isaac, and Alan and Kelly's daughter, Charlotte's here. Yes. Mention that, yeah. And cousin Rena is here, and her husband, David, and their daughter, Sarah, is joining us. And we also have Aunt Carrie here, and cousin Jacob, and his wife, Mercy. They came out from... Oh, his mother. Oh, sorry. So that's how young you look. Brother Mercy, they came out from Corpus Christi to join us today. So thank you all for coming.
And I just want to take a moment, Laura, Zach, and Alicia, you guys did a fantastic job. You stayed so strong. Yeah, I'll talk about her. I think at this time, you know, it's important to remember in such a short period of time the devastating losses that this family's had, starting with Cindy, and shortly after Alfonso, and sister Vicki, and now brother Joe. It's just devastating, and it all happened within a short period of time. I want to take a moment to mention, I got to know Vicki really well. Out of all the sisters, I told Sylvia this, that she was the sister I was the closest to. When I first started going over to the Villa household in the mid-'80s, she welcomed me in, and I was a little nervous. I was intimidated about going into that household. I knew that the father came out of a preaching background, and I didn't have the greatest reputation. I was kind of a rebel and got into a little bit of trouble, but Vicki welcomed me in. She laughed all the time with me, like Laura said. She had a nickname for me, which Sylvia reminded me of. I'm not going to repeat it because I don't want it to be construed in the wrong way. But she was a wonderful person and so special to me.
So, thanks, Steve. So, who are we? So, I'm Dale Worsham, and this is Steve Petch. And we consider Joe, the three of us, best friends when we were growing up. You know, we all have different phases in life, you know, that we can think of. The baby phase that we can't remember, the grade school phase, the teenage, high school phase, the college phase, the young adult, and now the old crabby phase for me. We all have these different phases, but with Joe, we had that most powerful phase of all, that young kid going through teenage phase. And that's a very influential phase on everybody. It's, you know, where we learn what it means to be alive and a young adult, and it's a magical, magical time. And we got to spend that time with Joe. And a lot of who we are today is determined by that time and our friendship with Joe. There are things that we do and say and think that are because we had those young days with Joe. And to give you a little context in our relationship, we grew up in the church, in this church here. We were part of the youth group. Before we were here at this building, we were actually located at 5th and Atlantic down the street at Central Church of Christ. There were 2 churches of Christ. There's actually like 4 in Long Beach. Who needs 4 churches of Christ in one city? But there was Central and there was Uptown. In the 80s, we merged and we all moved into this building, and we've been here ever since. And but I met Joe, it would have been, well, I want to go back in the youth group. So because the youth group was very powerful for us. A lot of people, when they're young, their best friends are from school, from junior high and high school. But for a lot of us at the youth group at this church, our best friends were this youth group. And our high school friends were kind of secondary. And so that had a big impact on us because when you grow up with your best friends at a church, you tend to be a little bit emotionally available more than most people. I mean, after all, you sit in a circle and you hold hands and you pray and you sing songs together. You know, what teenagers sing church songs together? Well, we did. And a little known fact, Joe Villa was a great singer. He had the best voice. The only thing is he always did the girl parts. We would be in church and we'd be singing a hymn and it'd be going along and all of a sudden you hear this beautiful, you know, when we all get together, and it'd be Joe and he's just hitting the girl parts right on. It's a shame that we didn't encourage him to sing more because if American Idol was around then, we definitely would have had him go on American Idol. So anyway, the youth group was very important to us, and there's a lot of people that were here in that youth group, and I kind of want to say hi to them. So we have Stacy Settle. I'm going to use your maiden name. Stacy Settle. We have Dana Hoff. Stand up. Huh?
Stand up.
Oh yeah, go ahead, stand up. They want you to stand up. We didn't make you stand up. Come on, stand up. Stacy. Glenda speaks. Amy speaks. Dana Hoff. Okay, Dave Petch, Steve's brother. Who else do we got? Well, Jeanette Henniger, yes. Representing the one Henniger today. Who else? Oh, Amy. We got Amy. We got Laura. Laura, she was just a little kid then, but she still counts, so she's in the back there. So, but not only was this youth group powerful, but also everybody that knew this youth group, including the teachers like Steve Hay, the Mullins were there, and even our parents, we had a big impact on back then. So the youth group and Joe, it was very central to our lives and made a difference in who we are today and created a lifelong bond in us, in our families. We met Joe, it was the mid-70s, 77, something like that. And I remember the first time that I saw Joe Villa. I didn't like the looks of this kid. He had these big puffy cheeks with freckles on them. Obviously, somebody you wanted to stay away from. I was very suspicious, and we're talking like 10, 11 years old. And I had nothing to do with them. Back then it seemed like a year, but it was probably like 3 weeks. And then one day, it was a Sunday evening, and we were having church service, and the service already started, and Joe came running into the building, yelling, "Help! Help! Help!" And we all jumped up and ran outside. And what had happened is, as Joe's family was driving to church, and I think it was Sylvia, was it Ed driving? We're just going to say it was Ed. They don't remember anyway. But they were driving to church, and Ed cut off a Hell's Angel motorcycle gang member. Okay? This guy was very upset about it and proceeded to drive up next to them and kick their car while driving and scream and yell at him. Well, they pulled into the church parking lot at Central, and the guy followed them in. Joe dashed out of the car, ran into the building, "Help, help, help," and we all ran out there. And here was this big guy going after Ed and everything. And my dad, does everybody remember Bud? Yeah. So Bud jumps in, Elder Bud. He gets in there, his fists are clenched. And we're looking at this, and here's this guy in his 50s, balding, gray hair, a little portly. Sound familiar? So here, this old guy sitting here getting in, blocking this Hell's Angel guy, and we're amazed at the situation. And I turned to look at the person next to me, and it was Joe. And I remember we looked at each other, and from that moment on, we became friends. and we ran around that church and we caused havoc. My mom says that Dale and Joe could think of things that nobody else could think of. There's a lot of memories about Joe. He practically lived at our house. One year we went to Daybreak and we came back. Joe just ended up staying at our house, and after about a week, my mom said, "Joe, you should go home. Your family probably misses you and wants to see you." So Joe said, "Yeah, okay." So he packed up his suitcase and his sleeping bag, and my dad drove him home, and then my dad came back home, and I remember feeling this empty feeling, where's Joe? And then about 10 minutes later, here comes Joe riding up on his bicycle. My mom said, "Joe, I thought you were going to go home and see your family." He's like, "Yeah, it's home." I said hi. And he came back. Last night I was listening to songs that I remember Joe could sing really well and going over them, and our favorite was "Endless Love." That was a hit back then, so that would come on the radio, and we would just start singing it, and we would start out doing Lionel Richie's part, "Two hearts, two hearts," and then all of a sudden Joe would break into Diana Ross, and he did Diana Ross better than Diana Ross. I won't attempt it because I don't want to scare you off. Anyway.
Well, like Dale said, a lot of this started for me in the Central Church of Christ. Steve Hay was a young teacher, young guy then, and he was our middle school teacher. And that's where I first met Joe. I met Dale and Stacy first. I was a little nervous, 5th grade, but at that time the middle school classes were combined, and Steve Hay was the teacher. It's unfortunate he couldn't be here today. So then I met Joe, and like Dale said, I was very intimidated by Joe. Joe has that when you first meet him, he intimidates you. So I said, I gotta be careful around this guy. I don't want to rub him the wrong way. I don't want to get on his bad side. So eventually time went on, and Dale and Joe were very close. Eric Henniger was another one in the group, and Eric and I became close. But eventually, as time moved on, Eric moved to Thousand Oaks, and Dale took an early leave from high school and went to college early, and Joe and I were left. And Joe called me one day, and he said, "Steve," he goes, "you and I haven't really hung out a whole lot. We don't know each other that well, but I'm looking for a best friend. Would you be my best friend?"
Thanks a lot, Joe.
And nobody never really said that to me before. And I said, "Well, we could. Let's hang out. Let's go do something. Let's get to know each other a little better outside of just group, youth group functions." So we proceeded to start hanging out on a regular basis, and that's why I thank the wonderful household that let me stay many weekends there. Dolores, you were so kind, and I know we drove you crazy, and probably Ed and Sylvia too at times. But thank you for letting me spend so many weekends over there during high school. A couple of stories. Real quick, I'll make them quick because I know we have to be time conscious. I know that, I'm aware of that. One story I remember, Dana Hoff, who's here, was with Joe and I. And Joe goes, "Steve, it was late at night. Joe and I had had too many beers, about 12 to 2 in the morning. Joe decides he wants to jump off the Seal Beach Pier." And I didn't think he was serious. And he goes, come on, Dana's with us. And Dana and I and Joe walk out there, and all of a sudden Joe takes off his shirt. We're out by guys fishing. I mean, there's guys fishing. Their lines are out. It's between 12 and 2 in the morning. Joe takes off his shirt, jumps off the pier. And I didn't want to jump off the pier. But I said, if Joe jumped off the pier, I got to jump off the pier. I have to. I can't let Joe go into that water without me. I took off my shirt, jumped in the water. Well, thank goodness for Dana. It took us forever to get in, but Dana walked along that pier until we got to the shore successfully. And it took us a long time to get in. All I remember is how cold the water was. Another story, and I'm going to try to move quickly. I appreciate everybody's patience, but they're such great stories. This came a little later on, maybe toward the beginning of college. Joe and I used to spend a lot of time up on Signal Hill. At that time, there weren't a lot of houses up there. You could go up there, have fun, have a beer or two, not worry about things. Joe said, Steve, I got a great idea. Let's take 2 of these empty beer bottles that we just drank. Let's go down this trail. Let's set them on this little rail by a building. We're going to leave them there. Both beer bottles are going to represent each one of us as friends. They're empty, and they're going to be there. And we're going to come back in 1 year, and we're going to see if those 2 empty beer bottles are still there. We came back a year later, walked down that same trail along the side of a building, and sure enough, those 2 Budweiser bottles were still sitting on that same rail, representing the friendship that Joe had come up with this idea a year before. It was amazing. I can't believe those beer bottles were still there. They were. And lastly, Joe was the life of a party. We had many parties up at the Palos Verdes house. And Joe came out one time. He came out, you never knew what, Joe's unpredictability was great. He came out in a red Speedo and combat boots in the middle of the day, and everybody's just looking at him going, wow. Hey, you know what? That was Joe. Joe was Joe. We loved it. It was just great. I need to be brief. We took a trip to South Padre Island. It was wonderful. Joe came out to Texas to be with us. He was supposed to stay a week to go to spring break, ended up staying the whole semester. I don't know how Dale and I got through our classes. On the way there, we stopped at the Alamo. And we had a little bit to drink. And I had this wild idea that I was going to climb up on the Alamo and get a picture taken. And so I started to climb up on there, and all the Alamo police came and were going to arrest me because I said a couple things that I shouldn't have to them. But Joe stepped in and started doing immediate damage control. And this was only one of a couple times that he saved me. And Joe went to work on these, what I called cowboy police, and he stopped them from arresting me. And I'll never forget that. I definitely would have been arrested that day if it wasn't for Joe. Okay?
So, how are we doing on time? We're okay, right? Don't worry about it. We're okay. So, there's so many other stories we have. We've got about a half an hour stories left, so just kidding. Just kidding. But there are a lot of stories that we could tell, so that's why everybody is invited to come to my house after the fellowship time and the sandwiches that we're going to have. If you want to continue sharing stories, please come over my house. My address is posted on Joe's Memorial Facebook page, or I can let you know what the address is, but we would love to have you come over and share more stories about Joe and listen to music that Joe loved. But just briefly, a few, stories. My first beer is with Joe, by the way. I won't tell you how old I was, but it was Miller High Life, the champagne of beers. Joe had an outrageous humor. Many of the stories we can't tell in church, so that's why you should come to my house. Here's an abbreviated list. Does anybody remember the Boneheads? It was an exclusive club. Don't you wish you were a member of it? If you ask Joe, boxers or briefs, the answer would be Commando. The Super Bowl Sunday pantsing incident. The Bulldog. The stink bomb at Camp Tonda.
And the many nights that we destroyed Bruce and Romaine, who are Stacy and Stephanie's parents' house, toilet papering their house while they were on Catalina Island. And I know it just drove Bruce crazy, but we wanted to destroy that house every time they took that boat to the island. And I think it was Joe's idea the one night where he goes, let's really get Bruce and Romaine and Stacy and Stephanie. Let's put confetti on the lawn and turn on the sprinklers. They'll never be able to get it up. I know that was Joe's idea. I know it.
Joe's idea.
And of course he loved his Skull tobacco. We know that in the music Dale talked about. He was a Dallas Cowboy fan. And he used to irritate our youth leaders of the day. We won't go into names. And we talked about some of the practical jokes.
Oh, right. And so in a special memory, Stacy Settle remembers Joe as the big brother that she always wanted and that she found in him. And she remembers the time that he rescued her when she accidentally shot herself in the foot with a BB gun. No, it was a 22. She says that Joe, that he was kind and strong, stupid and funny. He chewed that disgusting tobacco, but always gave the best hugs. You can count on Joe to be there for you.
As we went into early adulthood, things get somewhat complicated. Complicated is probably not the right word to describe it, but, we move on with our lives. Some get married, some have kids, some move out of the area for jobs. We go through personal struggles. Everybody does. And you begin to drift slowly apart. And that happened to us as a group, and we drifted apart for a few years.
And of course, we all know that nobody's perfect, and Joe had his imperfections, just like all of us. We have all sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. But even though we drifted apart, Joe always has a strong place in our heart. And I know that a lot of us probably feel some regret right now that we weren't closer to Joe in these last few years. And I think that we probably feel a sense of loss. A loss in the time that we were hoping to have with Joe in the future. And a feeling that we lost that special friendship, that we lost Joe's smile, his good humor, and his unpredictability. But the truth is that we really have not lost these things, because Joe will always be a part of who we are, our very personalities. He'll always be in our hearts and in our memories. And these things we will not lose, and these things don't die, because we pass them along to our children, our families, and our friends. And if we believe, as I know many of us do, in the afterlife, one day we'll be in heaven and we'll get to see Joe again. And we'll get to see that smile of his in heaven. And we'll get to see him with a halo and wings and a harp and a robe. And we'll wonder if under that robe, is he wearing boxers or is he going commando? So let's take these feelings of loss and regret, and let's take these good memories and let's create fertile ground. Ground to grow the relationships that we have here and now. Look around at the loved ones and friends around you, many of them that we haven't seen in years. And let's remember that we have a short time left here on earth. And let's remember those that we love and those that have drifted away. And let's reinvigorate our relationships with our loved ones. And let's do it in the memory and the honor of Vicki and Joe Alfonso Villa. Thank you, everybody, for being here today and bearing with us and listening to our stories. And now we're going to see the Joe Haida presentation that Alan put together.
Yeah, Alan, you did such a great job on these presentations. Thank you so much for doing that.